It is the start of a new year. Billions of people around the world have celebrated the start of 2025. Mere hours after that was the terrorist attack in New Orleans, and only hours after that, another attack, this time in Las Vegas. Within the span of about 6 hours, 17 people were dead and dozens more injured. The country at large was really forced to turn from celebration to mourning and fear. And two attacks are hard enough to comprehend without also wondering about the possibility that these two callous attacks may in fact be related. Are these both coordinated attacks, or is it just a terrible coincidence? The man pictured here would go on to kill 15 people on Bourbon Street before getting into a shootout with police and having his own life ended. This was a heavily planned and executed attack. It involved firearms, IEDs, and a rented vehicle used as a battering ram. But before we get into specifics, I would like to look a little bit at the timeline of events, specifically for Jabbar. Although the specific timestamp isn't listed, Jabbar put several firearms up for sale in the days prior to the attack. The listing specifically stated that they were great for sending home invaders to hell. Now, if home invaders meant specifically people coming into your physical home, or a greater message of someone invading a country, I'm not quite sure, but that is what the listing says. And the idea that there is this open market where people can purchase and sell weapons is pretty terrifying to me, at least, but that's not really the point of this video. Though it is worth noting that that is likely the reason he posted all of these firearms for sale. He would no longer need them after the event. I think he knew this was a one-way trip for him. The only firearms he needed were the ones that he used in the attack itself. On December 30th, Jabbar rents a vehicle, specifically the electric version of the Ford F-150, in Houston, Texas. This was rented through the car rental app named Turo, and that will be important as we go forward. Before he leaves with that truck, neighbors see him loading up and ask him if he needs any help loading, and he tells them no, he's got it. Everything that he has loaded up is really light materials, and that he's packing up because he received a new job in New Orleans. Obviously, with that information, they had no idea what he was on his way to do, but it is interesting that that's the excuse that he used for loading up a truck. On December 31st, New Year's Eve, hours before he would arrive at New Orleans, we see him drive from Houston to New Orleans, and we know that he took this drive specifically on that date because both surveillance cameras that they followed throughout from there to there, or from point to point, but also because of the recordings he took along the way. He allegedly took 5 video recordings on his way from Houston to New Orleans. Those videos are not being currently made public, but they were when they originally were posted to Facebook before being pulled, assumingly by the FBI. In those videos, he did a lot of rambling, allegedly, about his beliefs and his reasonings for the attack. He also said his original intent was actually to attack his friends and family, but that he thought the media at large would misunderstand his reasonings. He wanted it to be very clear that this was a matter of a war beginning between believers and non-believers, and only killing his family and friends, he thought that message might get lost. In those recordings, he also mentions that he has joined the infamous ISIS terrorist group. He specifically states that it was last summer that he did join them. I am hoping that at some point these videos become public. I would really like to look at them to see if there's more that's not being said about them as far as his demeanor, other things that he said that may not necessarily seem relevant but probably are. And I'm assuming at some point they probably will become public information, and when they do, of course, we will go over those here at this channel. In the early hours of New Year's Day, approximately between 1 to 2 a.m., he does a couple of things during this time. Number one, all of the videos that he's recorded on his travels, he starts posting them one by one to Facebook. Why Facebook of all places, I don't know. At the same time, he also drops off 2 different IEDs in coolers, one of them directly on Bourbon Street and one of them a couple of blocks away. According to the FBI, several people were seen on surveillance cameras interacting with those coolers that had the IEDs in them, but apparently none of them are involved with this. They maybe just were looking for some drinks, I suppose, considering the holiday. But no one picked up any of those coolers, and as far as I know, no reports were made about suspicious activities or materials involving those coolers either. At 3:02 a.m., he posted the last of those 5 recordings to Facebook and started to make his way over to Canal Street. At 3:15 a.m., that's when everything really starts to happen. There is a video shown of him cutting between a police vehicle and the sidewalk where people are on Bourbon Street at the intersection of Canal and Bourbon Street. From there, he had free reign of Bourbon Street. He drove all down both the street itself and the sidewalk. He ran over as many people as he could, all while shooting out of the window with various firearms. Throughout this journey and towards the end, police finally caught up with him and began shooting at the vehicle in an attempt to stop him. Once it finally came to a stop, they'd gotten in a shootout between both the gunmen and the police itself.
What the fuck? I died this fucking nerd!
In that shootout, 2 police officers were wounded, but they were able to stop the vehicle from progressing any further down the street. Also, they were able to shoot the attacker, and in shooting the attacker, that effectively stopped him. In total, 15 people were killed, and dozens more were injured. Those injuries range from cuts and bruises from trying to run away, to broken bones from actually being hit, all the way up to head trauma from, again, being hit, and also from gunshot wounds. And I obviously hope the people that were injured make a full recovery that are hospitalized currently, but I have also seen a lot of videos of the incident itself, a lot of which are too graphic for me to even show here in this video. And based on that video and how gruesome some of those injuries were, I absolutely would not be surprised in the coming days if that death toll rises beyond that 15 number. The initial news breaking about this event was chaotic and unclear, and it does tend to be that way for any mass casualty events, as it's hard to get reliable information at first. But even given that unclarity, the initial news that came out about it was even more unclear than it should have been. On one hand, you had the FBI stating that this was not a terrorist attack, when literal moments later, the mayor of the city stated the exact opposite.
This is not a terrorist event. What it is right now is their improvised explosive devices that was found, and we are working on confirming if it's a viable device or not.
The city of New Orleans was impacted by a terrorist attack. It's all still under investigation.
And if you've seen any of my previous videos, you know how I feel about the flippant usage of the word terrorist. It seems to be either under or overutilized, including in the case of Luigi Mangione, who killed one singular individual man, but is somehow a terrorist. And yet the FBI refused to initially call this a terrorist attack, despite the mass carnage that was done. But anyway, the initial indication was that Jabbar was not working alone. They did state that he had accomplices working with him. I find this to be really interesting, specifically because of the language that is typically used in scenarios like this. They tend to leave it sort of open-ended and non-definite. They would say there may be someone else working with the suspect, however, we're working to rule that out. Or that they are looking into ensuring that this is a lone attack, or something else to that effect, where it's just really open-ended but not definite about whether or not they had someone working with him. But in this case, they specifically said that it was 3 men and 1 woman that were working with this attacker. That's very precise language, down to the very gender of the people accused of working with him. They also stated that these people were not in custody and that they did not know where they were. They have later come out and stated that there is in fact no accomplices and no one was working with Jabbar, which again I find odd considering the specific language they used initially. And that oddity is one of dozens that I have noticed within this case that we'll kind of go through as we get further into it. And while they tried to figure out if this was in fact a terrorist, Trump and his entire crew took to the internet like a plague. They claimed to somehow know that this was an immigrant, more specifically an illegal immigrant, and that this illegal immigrant crossed over the Mexican border 2 days ago, or 2 days prior to the incident. As usual, they were not only wrong, but they were catastrophically wrong. Jabbar was born and raised in Texas. He was a retired veteran and he worked in real estate. He was far from what you can consider to be an illegal alien. He in fact wasn't an alien at all. Some of the people that posted those initial claims quietly deleted those posts from social media, but a lot of them doubled down. They simply ignored the fact that this isn't the case of an illegal immigrant, and instead continued to put out their propaganda that every problem this country has is due to illegal aliens. And while this terrorist was certainly not an illegal alien as they suggested, he was definitely influenced by a foreign entity. More specifically, he was influenced by the foreign terror group ISIS. And if you were wondering how we know specifically that it was ISIS, for one, there was a giant black ISIS flag flying in the back of the truck while he used it as a battering ram and a murder weapon. He also stated in those recordings that he did join ISIS just the summer prior to the attack. And according to people who knew him, or at least his neighbors, while he did live about 2 blocks away from a mosque, they said he didn't attend that mosque and he preferred to pray at home. I also want to be abundantly clear here when I say that the religion of Islam itself is not the problem here. Every religion that has ever existed has had extremists within that religion. Islam is no exception to that rule. However, extremists do not, have not, and will not ever represent the religion as a whole. So now we know the timeline and the facts about the case of the attack in New Orleans. But I know that you can get that timeline just about anywhere. That's not necessarily the purpose of the video. However, I did want to look at some of the oddities within the case, including its possible relation to the attack in Las Vegas. At 8:40 a.m. local time, a Cybertruck parked outside of the Trump Tower in Las Vegas randomly and without warning exploded. Thankfully, only one person was killed in this attack, that person being the driver, but there was 7 people who were injured during this blast, though it is said that those injuries are relatively minor. And Tesla vehicles as a whole, not just Cybertrucks, are known to randomly combust, most of those blasts coming from the electric vehicle batteries. So initially it was unclear if this was a random combustion like all of the others, or if this was an intentional act. But it soon became very clear that not only was this intentional, it was a message. Unless you've been living under a rock for about the past year now, then you probably know about the relationship between incoming President Trump and billionaire Elon Musk. There are a lot of people who are really angry that someone who is not an elected official can have so much influence not only over an election itself, but also the policies of that incoming president. This includes being assigned his own government department and being able to influence the national budget. And no one's elected Elon Musk, but yet he gets to run around as the boy king who was. So the sight of a vehicle that is produced by one of Elon's companies parked outside of the Trump Tower exploding was a terrible coincidence at best and really nefarious at worst. That was the first sign that it was intentional just because of the obvious messaging there, but beyond that obvious message was also the fact that in the back or the bed of that truck was several pounds of fireworks, gas, and camping fuel. So it was pretty obvious that it was intentional, and strange that it would happen so close to the attack in New Orleans, both in terms of time and physical distance. But how could they be connected? That's part of some of the oddities that I mentioned earlier. Let's take a look at some of those connections between both attacks. First and foremost are the attackers themselves. One, Jabbar, we know from New Orleans, but the other attacker from Las Vegas, his name is Matt Libbelsberger. Both were either active or retired Army, and both were once stationed at Fort Bragg. More specifically, they were both stationed at Fort Bragg at the same time. This is the same Fort Bragg that has had several controversies all on its own over the past decade. Recent attempted assassin Ryan Ruth, who attempted to assassinate Donald Trump in Palm Beach, Florida, actually visited Fort Bragg about 147 times in the coming months prior to his attempted assassination. In 2022, there was actually a beheading case. That is the known method of killing of ISIS, by the way. And although it happened on the same base, both the coverage from the news media and just public attention in general dissipated really and weirdly quickly on that case. At the same time, over a dozen different soldiers died of suspicious circumstances on the base, and the details of that investigation was conducted by the Army and again not released to the public. In 2020, at least 40 different soldiers that were assigned to Fort Bragg died mysteriously. They didn't die overseas or in combat, they died either on the base or in the United States. The one thing they had in common was that they were all currently assigned to Fort Bragg. The Army claimed to be investigating their suspicious deaths, but wouldn't give any details of that investigation either to the public or even to the families of those dead soldiers. And most recently, in 2023, 13 different soldiers assigned to Fort Bragg were investigated for drug trafficking charges. It's unclear what the result of that investigation was, and much like all of the other cases, the public was not given any details on that investigation. And at any base that you look at, you're going to see some sort of criminal activity. It's bound to happen considering a lot of the bases are the size of cities. The sheer size of them, both in terms of acreage and personnel, is akin to a city. So you're going to see certain activities take place. But the sheer amount of suspicious deaths, investigations that have been swept under the rug, and connections to terrorists that have been converted into extremism have all come back specifically to Fort Bragg, when that's not been the case for any other military base in the United States. So something is definitely going on at that base, and whether or not that something that is going on is being perpetuated by the people who lead those bases, I don't know. It could also be something that's underground, and the leadership team there at Fort Bragg is too embarrassed for that information to get out. But ultimately, it does seem that they have a cell of extremism that's coming directly from Fort Bragg. Especially now that we're looking at both of these cases where both of these men were working at the exact same time on that base, somehow commit these acts of terrorism. Also tying both of these crimes together are the use of electric vehicles. And when I found out what was happening in New Orleans, I really couldn't help but think about the choice that was made for using an electric vehicle for that purpose. Because unlike gas vehicles, they're very quiet. Even at high or sudden speeds, you can't hear them coming. And you especially can't hear them coming when you're in a city that is designed for a very large party. You've got music, you've got people, you've got just so many sounds of so many things going on at the same time, and you add that to a very quiet by nature vehicle, you're not going to hear it coming behind you. I was disturbed enough by that choice, but then when I heard what was happening in Las Vegas, it was very clear to me that it was a message. As far as what the message is, I am still trying to untangle that. I started reviewing the footage of what happened in Las Vegas, and I watched it forwards and backwards and from every angle that was possible. And what I noticed was that parked in front of the Cybertruck was the exact same make and model of the vehicle that was used in the attack in New Orleans. Now, it's possible that just it happened to be parked behind the same type of vehicle, and the timing doesn't line up where it is the exact same vehicle. And I'm not saying that second vehicle was involved at all in Las Vegas. What I am saying is it's odd that it would be present at both locations. Also, the truck that was used in the New Orleans attack was specifically an electric version of the Ford F-150. I was curious to see what, if anything, Ford itself had to say about the event that happened with their vehicle. And weirdly enough, when I went to go look at their Twitter or X account, what I found was that in the day prior to the attack, their account was hacked. During the time that it was hacked, there were only 3 posts that were put out. And those 3 messages were Free Palestine, Israel is a terrorist state, and All Eyes on Gaza. Now, sometimes things just aren't related, but the more I look into both of these cases, the more I have to wonder how many of these things that just happen to revolve around the case are a coincidence. Much like the electric vehicles themselves, I don't believe this hacking is a coincidence. Jabbar, the attacker from New Orleans, happened to have a history in the Army of being an IT specialist. And the other attacker from Las Vegas, Matt, who was assigned to the same base at the same time, is an active Green Beret. He had specialties in security operations, mobile communications, technology integration, and computer networking. Both of these men, given their backgrounds and histories, are more than capable of hacking into a simple social media account. And to cover my bases here, neither the FBI nor any news agencies are stating that this hacking and the attacks are in any way connected. This is just my opinion of a possibility. But back to those vehicles. Both vehicles were rented on the same day and through the same app, specifically the app Turo. I do find it a little odd that Jabbar would be able to rent a vehicle at all, given his history and criminal convictions. While assigned to Fort Bragg, he was convicted of a 5th-degree DUI. His license was revoked and he had to serve a 12-month parole. In most traditional rental agencies with a history like that, you would not be able to rent a vehicle. And yet with Turo, he was allowed to. I'm not sure if that's because this offense is 10 years old and they only look but so far back, or if they did see it and they didn't care. Or perhaps they don't check at all. According to their website, most people are approved instantly, and the only information underneath their safety section of their website covers the possibility of the infection of COVID. But I wanted to find out which one it was. Do they not check, or do they not care? So I reached out to them directly. I reached out to them letting them know I was thinking about renting a vehicle, but I had some concerns about their background information that they collected. And at first he just kind of said, I see, and you can find that information in our help center. And then he summarized it for me, saying basically what it says is the following. Turo has the right to decline your trip request and remove you from the platform because of your criminal background, driving record, or any other reason. So I said, okay. So does that mean a background check is done when I try to book a vehicle? Because what he's saying is that they could do any of these things, that they are able to do them, and they reserve the right to. He doesn't necessarily state that they are going to. So I wanted clarification and asked if they were going to actually do a background check when I would go to rent a vehicle. And he gave me kind of more of the same information. He said before booking is needed, an account verification, and Turo may check your personal and or business credit report, auto insurance score, and the criminal background to verify your account. He pretty much said the exact same thing without clarifying any further, when I think both he and I both knew that wasn't what I was asking. So I got more to the specifics. Are there any particular convictions that would make me ineligible to rent a vehicle? And he said, we have a specialized department for that kind of situation. And I said, cool. Can I speak with them? I was a little bit surprised when he said that they would review my account and inform me of whether or not I'm eligible to be on the platform. So it did seem like he was going to stonewall me on that and not answer me. But he did in fact connect me with that team. He didn't say anything. He just gave me that information and then he connected me. When I spoke to that new team, they asked me for my account information so that I could verify with them who it is that I am. But I'm not interested in giving them my identity. I'm interested in getting some parameters of what is and isn't allowed on the app. So I told them I haven't made the account yet. I am just trying to see if I'm eligible or not to rent a vehicle. And I asked them to try to goad them into giving more specific information to me. Is there a time limit considered? For instance, a conviction from 10 years ago. So they didn't like that question, I'm guessing. And they really didn't offer any information. All they said that they were going to transfer me to another person again. So I'm not sure at this point if I'm just annoying them based on a customer service level, or if they're just not supposed to give out that information and instead just transfer you around till you get bored. But I got some time on my hands, so I continued to prod them. I also stated that's who I just spoke with. They just forwarded me to you, which I believe is the truth. I believe they put me back to the same department I was in originally, but I digress. So I'm forwarded to another team, and they give me much of the same answer. I understand Turo's system is designed to check the identities or backgrounds of users, including driving history, driver's license validity. I highly suggest you create an account so you will know if you're eligible or not to book a car. So again, they keep prodding me to make an account to see if I'm specifically eligible. But they're not giving me any sort of guidelines of what is and isn't allowed underneath their app. They go on to specify about some of the information that they look for, but nothing too specific. More aptly, they just wanted to let me know that they use a third party to do that, and I would need to consent for them to look into that background. And I said, how can I consent if I don't know what it is that you're looking for? And then all of a sudden they wanted to know what country I was from, which I find interesting that they hadn't asked up until this point, as rules can be very different amongst different countries. But I let them know I'm from the United States. Once I let them know that I was from the United States, I just got shut down again. They just continued to say, okay, we'll make an account and we'll let you know whether or not you're eligible. And I didn't really feel like going in circles with them anymore past that point. It was very clear they had no intention of telling me what sort of rubric they had, but they did insist that some check was done. So knowing that they have this process to check, that either means that they ignored the information they found, or that specialized department I was transferred to that makes those checks isn't very good at their job. I don't personally know anyone that has any driving convictions or anything of the sort to test that. Otherwise, I would, because I'm curious if they would allow it through or not. But I don't have any record, and neither does anybody I know, so I wasn't able to test that personally. But I do know one person who has a record that was able to go through, that being the terrorist Jabbar. While looking through some of the oddities in this case, I did come across a video of EMS workers giving CPR to what appears to be Jabbar in the street after the attack and after the shootout. Yet in that same video, where they appear to be giving him CPR on the ground, there is a sheet that is covering the driver's seat. It almost looks like there's someone behind it, but given the quality of the video, it is really hard to tell. But I am curious why they would put that sheet there. Is it to preserve evidence? Is it to cover up someone else who was in there? I don't know. What I do know was that Jabbar's body was still on the ground many hours later, up until when it was sunlight outside. They didn't put a sheet over him, so why are they putting a sheet only and exclusively over that driver's seat? Also, the city of New Orleans has many metal barriers, also known as bollards, there locally. And they are used and designed for this specific purpose to prevent this exact type of attack. So why didn't they work? They are advanced technology able to retract and raise at the push of a button. Well, strangely enough, at this busy time of year when people are known to be wandering around in the streets, partying, drunk, inebriated, this is the exact time that they decided to go down for scheduled maintenance. So not only do you have people flocking to the city for New Year's Eve to celebrate, you also have people going to the city for the upcoming Sugar Bowl, the college game that is known to attract thousands of people. So you have tens of thousands of people that aren't normally in your city wandering around your streets, and that is the time you choose to do scheduled and planned maintenance. The scheduled maintenance was supposed to be down for several weeks while they worked on them, whatever that means. And the local police chief, Ann Kirkpatrick, didn't seem to know that these even existed to begin with.
Chief, where did those archers come from?
Sorry?
Those yellow archers, where did they come from?
Actually, we have them. I didn't know about them, but we have them. And so we have been able now to put them out.
Okay.
But as this is a tool not only for crowd control, but also to help the people be safe from cars running them over, you would think she should know. But this is also the same police chief who herself was accused of hitting 2 different people with her vehicle in New Orleans last year. This has all been so strange that I have worked really tirelessly to look into the details of both attacks and the men behind those attacks. And I'm using every resource at my disposal, one of them being X or Twitter. But what I find interesting is only a couple of hours after the attack, Twitter disabled the ability to search up that terrorist's name. But as of recording this video, the other terrorist, Matt, from Las Vegas, his name is still fully visible, as well as the ability to search his name, look up his pictures, or any other information you'd like about Matt. And maybe the difference is time. We found out the identity of the first attacker in New Orleans really quickly after the event. So just more time has passed between the actual event and turning off the ability to search his name. But is that, in fact, the factor? Is it race? Is it religion? Is it the known ties to ISIS? What specifically makes them so different where you can search the name of one and not the other? I also ask because blocking the use of searching his exact name doesn't prevent people from talking about the terrorist or the act itself. So I'm not really sure the point of it, besides to be annoying. One of the other odd things I found was that before the search function was blocked, I did find a video of Jabbar seemingly several years ago talking about his real estate office with Blue Meadow. Now there's conflicting reports whether or not Jabbar helped found Blue Meadow or if he was just employed by them. But regardless, he put out a real estate video in relation to that company, Blue Meadow, stating that he was going to work really hard to sell your home and everything else real estate people like to yap about. That video again was a couple of years old, which does make sense considering his real estate license expired in 2023. I've not found any evidence stating that he attempted to reactivate that license either. Most traces of Jabbar's activity tend to go dark at about the same time that his license expired. That leads me to believe that that is the time he converted not only to Islam, but also to extremism, which again are 2 separate things. He does have 2 children from 2 different marriages. From the second marriage, he actually has a restraining order that was put out against him from that second wife. She was apparently afraid for her life, and he had threatened her on multiple occasions. So she was granted this restraining order, which is really the only sign of any sort of violence or negative behavior that I've been able to find prior to this attack. Through those divorces and court hearings, he did have to testify to his financial state. He actually got behind on child support, and in that court hearing, he notified the court that he was in imminent danger of his home being foreclosed on, and that is why he was unable to make any sort of child support payments. All of this seemed to happen at the same time. Both the threats, the financial issues, the conversion to extremism, and it really shows a picture of a spiraling man. Despite us not knowing the exact details of how he was recruited and converted over to extremism and ISIS specifically, what we do know is that people in his position are prime targets for extremism. Both people that have the backgrounds like army service or any other service where you're familiar with weapons and IT support, but also people who are in really bad financial or social trouble. If you are isolated from people, if you are in need of money, and if you have any sort of background where you can be useful, they're going to try to recruit you ultimately. And that's what happened here. We don't know the exact details, but it's very clear what's happened. Back to his employer for Blue Meadow, whether or not he founded it, again, I'm not exactly sure. But back to Blue Meadow, I did want to check in to see if there was any information about him working there, any interviews with him, any posts specifically from him. So I go to look at their website, which is disconnected. I find a Google result for their phone number, which is disconnected. I find their account on X or Twitter. And on that account, throughout 2020 through 2022, there are normal posts about getting home loans and other real estate related things. But the day of the attack, or the day after the attack, depending on how you look at it, there was a couple of reposts that were referencing both Jabbar and the attack itself, which I found a little bit odd. It wasn't the company saying they had no part in it and that they have thoughts and prayers for the families of the victims. Instead, it was just reposting news articles or people talking about it. And then immediately after that goes back to posting about regular real estate things like home loans. So considering the company itself doesn't seem to be functioning, based on the website that was shut down and the phone number that doesn't work, who was posting on this Twitter account, both reposting the news articles and then going back to real estate things? Obviously, it's not functioning, so who's running that? Who's posting it? Who's reposting it? In addition to posting some of those news articles, there was a really cryptic message that said TRZ1, and I have looked really far into the depths of the internet, and I cannot find what that means. I don't know what that means. I truly don't. But I also don't know what's going on with that account in general. It's just another one of the odd things surrounding this case. Meanwhile, investigators are going both to the Airbnb used by the New Orleans attacker and to his home in Houston. The Airbnb that he used actually suffered a house fire in the morning of the attack. But the interesting thing is that Jabbar died at about 3:40 in the morning. This fire started at about 5:30 in the morning. Authorities have continued to state that he is working alone, but beyond one of those explosives possibly going off, I don't know what could have caused the fire unless it was personally done by someone involved. And none of the reports state that there was an explosion, just that a fire started small and then got larger until it burned a significant portion of the home. But the neighborhood surrounding that Airbnb has been evacuated, and as of the time of recording this video, still continues to be evacuated. People are not being allowed to return to their homes, or even if they rented one of those homes, they're not being allowed to return there either, even to gather their things. Back in Houston, where his regular home is, SWAT has surrounded that neighborhood as well. They have also evacuated everyone, but reports state that they have yet to go into the home. They're surrounding it, but they said that it would be hours before they could go into it. And I'm not sure if that's because they need further equipment to go into it, like bomb suits or some sort of robot that sniffs out bombs. I don't know. But it seems to be taking a while, even considering any equipment that would be needed. This is probably the most high-profile case in a very long time, obviously of this year, but it just started. But this is a very high-profile case. Everyone is foaming at the mouth to try to get out resources to help with this, including the president himself, who said, you guys have the full wealth of the federal government. So why is it that they can't go into the House? Why is it that they haven't yet? It is now 5:43, January 2nd. Why haven't they gone into the House? What's holding them back from going into the House? I don't know. But the Las Vegas attacker, we don't have a ton of information on, and that could be because it's a lower focus considering he's the only casualty. It could be because it's a little bit newer or because everyone's focused on the New Orleans attack. I'm not sure why there isn't as much digging on this attacker as well. But what we do know is that he died of a gunshot wound prior to the explosion going off in the Cybertruck. His body was burned beyond recognition, but somehow his identification that was with or on him didn't burn, and that's how they know who he is. I'm hoping they identify him in another way, maybe dental records or something. But as of right now, they just identified him based off that. And I'm also not sure if it was some sort of trigger or timer that caused that explosion, because if he shot and killed himself before that went off, how did it go off? Unless there was a timer that hasn't been mentioned in any of the evidence. And the media has been really hesitant to connect these two attacks, but I'm fully and entirely convinced that they are connected. There's just too many coincidences for them not to be. The vehicle types, where the vehicles were rented from at the same day on the same app. Both of them being stationed at Fort Bragg at the same time. Both of them committing a really extremist act at the same time or the same day. And in both cases, there seems to be a lot of cover-up going on. New Orleans is a really resilient city, and although they shouldn't have to rebuild and continue forward in the face of adversity as often as they do, I do know that they're fully capable of doing it. In Las Vegas at Trump Tower, there were no windows broken, and the wreckage of the Cybertruck has already been taken away to be processed for evidence, so that is essentially clean. And Bourbon Street has also been cleaned and reopened, although immediately after opening, there was a fire that broke out in the French Quarter. At the time of recording this video, the source of that fire is not known, and they are still working to contain it. So it will probably be some time before we know whether or not this is a random fire that happens in a city where people like to party, or if this is in any way related to the prior attacks or the many IEDs that the person made. Going forward, although the events themselves are technically over, the investigations for both of them are far from over. I also hope that we get some transparency in these investigations, and that includes the videos that Jabbar recorded on his way from Houston to New Orleans. I hope the city has to answer for their poor maintenance schedule and why that those would be down, and also why the police chief would be unaware that they existed to begin with. And I hope that the connection between both of these men and both of these attacks are fully and completely vetted. Just because they are both dead does not mean it's not important to see why, how, or when that these two men connected to plan and execute these attacks. I also wanted to bring up that I am aware that there was a mass shooting on New Year's Eve in New York, specifically in Queens, New York, at a nightclub. Thankfully, none of those people who were wounded have died from those wounds. And while this is an important event, and I obviously feel just as much for these families as I do for any of these and these other two attacks, I do want to say the reason I have not really gone into this mass shooting is because I don't feel that they are related. This video was specifically to look at these two cases, these two attacks, how they may be related, and a lot of the odd things that I've noticed in the investigation between the two. So it's not that I'm excluding speaking on that shooting. I will likely make a separate video on it, but I am excluding it from this video in particular. So for now, that is the whole truth, or the cold truth, as we like to call it here on this channel. To the people that have been affected by any of these events, whether the attack in New Orleans, the attack in Las Vegas, or the mass shooting in New York, all of the people that have been affected are in my thoughts. I wish peace for the families of those people affected, and I wish for justice in whatever form it can be given. In the meantime, if you want more continuous updates on these cases and more, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Thank you for watching.